Some weeks as I'm preparing for Sunday, as I'm finalizing my sermon and I'm rereading the gospel and praying over it, I just immediately think to myself, oh man, this one's about me. That describes my life. Today's gospel is one of those. And I'm betting it describes your life too. So I want to ask you two questions to see if today's gospel fits your life the way I think it does. Here's the first question. Have you ever made plans? Have you ever made plans for your life? And the second question, have your plans ever been interrupted? Chances are you answered yes to both of those questions. We've all made plans. Maybe it was for an hour, a day, a weekend, a vacation. Maybe it was for work or your finances or your family. And we've all experienced the interruption of those plans by circumstances that changed or an unexpected event that happened. Every one of us could probably say about today's gospel, well, darn, that's all about me. That describes my life. Today's gospel describes the tension in which we live, and it's the same tension in which Jesus and the disciples lived. The apostles have just returned from teaching, from casting out demons and anointing and curing the sick. They're telling Jesus about everything they've taught and did, and he says, come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while. Jesus made plans and has some expectations of what will happen, right? A boat ride across the lake will take them to a quiet place and give them some time to rest and eat and kind of recharge their batteries. Or so he thought. His plans, however, are interrupted by the many people who run ahead to meet him and the disciples as soon as the boat lands. His expectations of rest and food and recharging are unmet. There is no quiet, there is no rest. There's only the great crowd of people lost like sheep without a shepherd, interrupting what he had planned. Hasn't that happened to you? The circumstances may be different, but we all know what it's like to have life interrupted. What's that they say about the best laid plans? We all live in the tension between our plans and the interruptions of the world, our expectations and the unexpected. Life as we want it to be and life as it happens. Every one of us could tell a story about that. It happens in small ways and it happens in large ways. It's the baby waking up early from what you thought would be a quiet hour. Or a day that had nothing on the calendar that turns out to be one thing after another after another. It's taking a new job and finding out that you're not really doing what you thought or planned to do, and you're doing what you never expected. It's the diagnosis that interrupts retirement plans. It's the shattered dream, a divorce, a death. Our life plans get interrupted in 1,000 different ways, and the unexpected happens all along the way of life. I wonder what that looks like for you today. What are the plans or the expectations you have for your life? And what are the interruptions or the unexpected happenings with which you are dealing? Where is God in all of that for you? Well, I'll tell you, last Sunday, don't be too mad at me. Last Sunday, my family experienced an interruption. Danita had dropped off Jameson for a Boy Scout event at a place called Climb Time. Well, we experienced some pretty heavy rain, and the road right in front of climb time flooded. And as Danita was driving and attempting to pick up Jameson, a rather large truck plowed through the flooded road and sent a wave of water right into the front of Danita's minivan, flooding the engine. The van died. It never restarted. Never restarted. It certainly interrupted our plans for the next few days and some, as we ultimately had to have the van towed to a dealership despite my best efforts to get it running again. When our life plans are interrupted, it's easy and it's tempting to work even harder to make it happen, to reinforce our boundaries, to blame others, to rage about things not working out, to just throw in the towel and give up on the day, or to pray that God will make it go the way that we want, right? I can't tell you the number of times that I climbed into the driver's seat of the van after changing the starter, taking the battery and getting it recharged and hooking everything back up and sitting there about to push the start button saying, please, God, please just let this thing start. Jesus doesn't do any of that. He doesn't turn the boat around when he sees the crowd and goes, not today. We're going to go over to that shore where I don't see any people. No, that's not the way Jesus does it. He doesn't get angry or resentful. He doesn't blame or complain. He doesn't ignore or deny the interruption. He is simply present to what is. He takes his time and is present to what is. We often hold our plans and interruptions in opposition as if it is one or the other. But what if it's always both? What if it's always both? What if one is not necessarily better or more important than the other? What if we could equally be present to the plans and the interruptions? What if we trusted that God's Spirit was present and moving in both? And I don't mean that God picks or causes one over the other, but that within both the plans and the interruptions, God is present and calling. I'm not suggesting that we take a what will be kind of attitude and just give up on making plans. That's not going to help us out anywhere, is it? And we shouldn't just stop caring either. What I am suggesting is that everyday life, with all of its plans and its interruptions, is our most important spiritual practice. Everyday life is our most important spiritual practice. Everyday life is where God shows up. It's where we learn about ourselves. It's a school of love. It teaches patience and it offers opportunities to soften our hearts and act with compassion, opportunities to grow. It invites us into the mystery of creation. How we relate to one another mirrors our relationship to God. We learn to forgive. We practice faithfulness and hope amidst the uncertainties of life. It's not to take anything away from prayer or study or outreach or charitable giving or going to church or any of the other things that we might think of as our spiritual practices. It is to recognize that all of those are about being in relationship and living everyday life. That means that we must learn to see more deeply and to be more present to whatever is, whether it is planned, whether it is unexpected, or an interruption in direct opposition to our plans, desired or unwanted. Faithfulness is about being intentional and caring toward the interruptions as we are to our plans. Isn't that how Jesus lived? That's what we see in today's gospel and throughout Jesus' life. Remember the stories before today. Jesus and the disciples get in a boat and they leave the crowds behind. A storm arises. Jesus is asleep. The disciples freak out and they wake Jesus up. They interrupt his nap. He calms the sea and the wind. As soon as they get across the sea and Jesus steps out of the boat, he's immediately met by a man with an unclean spirit. Another interruption. Jesus calls the spirit out of the man. They go back across the sea and he is again surrounded by a crowd. Yet another interruption. Jairus comes to beg Jesus' help for his dying daughter. Another interruption. Jesus goes with him, but this current interruption gets interrupted when the hemorrhaging woman touches the fringe on his cloak and is healed, and he feels the power go out of him. She's healed, and Jesus continues on with Jairus, but before he can get there, they're interrupted by messengers who come to say it's useless. The girl is dead. And Jesus raises the girl. He goes to his hometown and he teaches, but is interrupted by questions and unbelief. And then we come to today's gospel. It's one interruption after another after another. But what was the common thread through all of that is Jesus was present to every one of those interruptions. Not once did he go, oh, sorry, I'm busy, I got to go. I've got other things going on today. I've got places to be. Time is of the essence. Not once did he do that. All along the way, Jesus is present and faithful to whatever and whoever is before him, whether it was planned or unexpected. That's not just about tending to the lives of others. That's also how we tend to our own lives. That's how Jesus tended to his life. You know, one of my pastor friends has always astonished me and inspired me with his ability to get himself into trouble. Yeah. He is always late. Always late. If you want him to be on time, you better... Service starts at 9:30, man. He might be here by the time the sermon starts. Let me explain why. His motto, his way of being and living is this: you are the second most important person behind Jesus Christ. You are the second most important person to him behind Jesus Christ. And since Christ is always with him, that means whoever is in front of him is the most important person in the world. You get his full, undivided attention when you are with him. His wife has come to expect that he'll end up eating a cold dinner because he is present with someone somewhere, and whoever it is happens to be in front of him, and so they are the most important person in that moment. Being present, that's what it's all about for him. And just like Jesus, he knows the Spirit of God blows where it chooses. And that means we are always to be discerning the movement of the Spirit in our lives, in our plans and interruptions alike. Always making ourselves available and present in the moment. Yeah, we might have to stop what we're doing and shift our focus, but that's okay. What is that movement in the plans and the interruptions of your life today? How is God moving for you? In what way is God present and calling in the midst of all of that? What do you see? What might be hidden at the intersection of your plans and the unexpected? Maybe there is always something of God hidden at that intersection. It's an opportunity for you to see God. See, the feeding of the 5,000 and Jesus' walking on water, they're actually an intersection of Jesus' planned getaway and the interruption by the crowd. The crowd that interrupted Jesus' plans is the crowd of 5,000 that were fed with 2 fish and 5 loaves, and all ate and were filled. See, those two stories, Jesus is walking on water and the feeding of the 5,000, are not part of today's lectionary reading, but they fall between the first half of today's gospel, Mark 6:30 through 34, and the second half, Mark 6:53 through 56. I got to wondering, why were they left out? What if they were not omitted or excluded from today's reading, but they were intended to be understood as hidden? God in motion, God's movement when we are present, when our plans and an interruption intersect one another, when we see God in those moments. So it was understood that, yes, the feeding of the 5,000 and the walking of water happened, but it was at the intersection of Jesus' plans and the interruptions of life. What if abundance and nourishment, presence and reassurance are somehow hidden at the intersection of our plans and interruptions? What if the fringe of Jesus' cloak is always being made available to us? Yes, we have hopes and desires for ourselves and our lives. We've made plans, but let's not lose sight that God also has hopes and desires for us and our lives, even when we experience interruptions. Let us be present in the midst of all that is happening, plans and interruptions alike. For that is when the least of these receive what they need, and we meet Jesus face to face in the most unlikely of places. So lean in to those interruptions and look for God and his movement through the Spirit in the interruptions of life. Let us pray.